This isn't just another story about celebrity gossip. No, this one's different. It's about a crisis so big, it forced a centuries-old institution to, well, to turn on one of its own. We're going to break down the fall of Prince Andrew. And where does this story really kick off? Not with a rumor, but with something you almost never see, a full-on, official act of banishment. We're talking about a senior prince, the queen's own son, being stripped of his royal and military titles. Just gone. And that really begs the question, right? How on earth did the queen's son fall so far, so fast? I mean, this is a man born into unbelievable privilege, once a celebrated public figure, and now he's a total outcast. That's what we're here to figure out. So let's start with this idea of being crowned and out. You see, Prince Andrew's removal from public life wasn't some quiet retirement. Nope. This was a calculated, strategic move by the monarchy itself. A survival tactic, really. And this really sets the stage for the whole thing, from war hero to zero. To really get the scale of this downfall, you have to understand that there were basically two Prince Andrews, the one the public was meant to see and the one that existed behind closed doors. Okay, so look at this. This slide really lays out the massive disconnect. On the one hand, you've got the public image, the one they spent decades building up. In 1982, he was a genuine national hero, a Navy pilot in the Falklands War. After 2001, he becomes the UK's special trade envoy, a senior royal doing his duty. But then there's the other column. Behind the scenes, a totally different story was brewing. Sources have described this private reputation for being, well, arrogant, pompous, and frankly, pretty unpopular. And then there's the big one. A knack for linking up with some, let's just say, very unsavory figures. And eventually, that private reputation was bound to crash into public view. And when it did, it sparked a scandal that would slowly, and then all at once, just completely swallow his royal career whole. You know, this quote from former royal correspondent Stephen Bates just nails it. He said, "It's been a bit like pulling the strand of wool on a jumper. The more you pull, the more the whole thing unravels." And that's exactly what happened. This wasn't one big explosion. It was the slow, steady pulling of a thread over 15 years until the entire facade just fell apart. So how did it all go down? This timeline really shows the escalation. It all starts back in the early 2000s with his association with Jeffrey Epstein. For years, it kind of bubbles under the surface. But then, boom, August 2019, Epstein dies in prison, and suddenly, all eyes are on his associates, including Andrew. Just a few months later, in what might be one of the biggest PR disasters ever, he gives this car crash interview to the BBC. That really sealed his fate. It leads directly to a civil lawsuit, which he settles in February 2022. But by then, it was too late. He'd already relinquished his titles the month before. Okay, that BBC interview, it was truly the point of no return. His attempts to clear his name just backfired in the most spectacular way. He offered these alibis that were, well, they were just unbelievable. He claimed that on the night of an alleged assault, he was at a Pizza Express in a town called Woking. Then he tried to discredit an account of him sweating by claiming he had a medical condition that made him unable to sweat. And maybe most famously, despite this photo floating around everywhere, he said he had no recollection of ever meeting his accuser, Virginia Giuffre. But, you know, it wasn't just the bizarre alibis that did the damage. It was what he didn't say. This quote from Stephen Bates gets right to the heart of it. The prince showed this shocking lack of concern or compassion for Epstein's victims. He seemed totally casual, totally unbothered by his friendship with a convicted sex offender. And that perceived lack of empathy, it was absolutely devastating to his reputation. And we have to remember at the absolute center of all this is the victim's perspective. In her posthumous memoir, Virginia Giuffre wrote this incredibly powerful indictment. She framed the alleged abuse not as just some one-off incident, but as a symptom of a culture where powerful men believe they are completely untouchable above the law. So as this whole thing snowballed, it became pretty clear this wasn't just about Prince Andrew anymore. This was becoming an existential threat to the monarchy itself. And that's when the institution, often called the firm, started to fight back, to protect itself. And that term, the firm, is so important to understanding what happened next. It kind of reframes the royal family, right? They're not just relatives. They're like a corporation. And what's their primary business? Survival, brand management. So when one of your key employees becomes a toxic asset, well, the business has to act. So why the final decisive acts? Well, the reasons were purely strategic. First, protect the brand. The scandal was just killing the monarchy's credibility. Second, clear the decks. King Charles had big events on the horizon, and he wanted zero distractions. There was also a ton of pressure from within the family, especially from the future king, Prince William. And really, at the end of the day, getting rid of Andrew was a crucial step in this bigger project of creating a more modern, slimmed-down monarchy for the future. Okay, so Andrew's out, but the questions his downfall raised, they're still hanging over the palace. This one scandal has really exposed some deep vulnerabilities for the entire royal family. Let's start with a number, £12 million. That is the reported figure Prince Andrew paid to settle that civil case with Virginia Giuffre. I mean, that is a staggering amount of money. And that settlement leads to a very, very awkward and so far completely unanswered public question. He settled without admitting liability, but where did the money come from? For a guy with no obvious independent wealth on that scale, it's a huge mystery. Rumors have been flying that his late mother, the Queen, might have helped foot the bill, but the total lack of transparency just adds fuel to the fire of public suspicion. And this really brings us to the monarchy's single biggest challenge, its future. This chart shows that while the institution is still popular overall, it has a serious, serious problem with younger generations. Their approval is way lower. And a scandal like this one, built on entitlement, privilege, and these shady, unanswered questions about money, is the exact kind of thing that pushes away a generation that really values transparency and accountability. At the end of the day, the Prince Andrew crisis really just shines a spotlight on a fundamental truth. If ancient institutions want to survive in the modern world, they have to adapt, they have to change. And historically, that is something the monarchy has really, really struggled to do. So, that's where we'll leave it. King Charles and Prince William are betting big that a smaller, more modern, slimmed-down version of royalty is the answer. But after a scandal that really exposed the institution at its absolute worst, you have to ask, is that kind of reform really going to be enough to secure its future for generations to come?